Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Esau Macaulay podcast. You know, I ever thought about this, Mike. Should I introduce you first or the guest?
Probably the guest.
Okay. Today on the podcast, we have Vince Bacote. He is the director of something at Wheaton College. What's it called?
The Center for Applied Christian Ethics.
There we go. That's very fancy. Also known as CASE, and you're also a professor of theology.
That's
and
also
you produce podcasts.
Yeah, I was just thinking I need a fancy title.
You produce
too.
podcasts.
I produce.
Okay.
My mom is so proud.
So you teach at Wheaton College. How long have you been there?
I'm in my 26th year.
Do you feel like how many students you think you've taught over those years? Just give a rough number.
Oh, wow. Several thousand.
Do you have a pretty good memory when it comes to your students?
I used to remember every student I had up until about 2006.
Oh, wow, 2006.
There are still a lot of students that I remember from every year.
Do you have students who've gone out into the world, into media, and have done anything?
In terms of media?
Yeah.
Yes, there is a student I had. He's a composer. His name's Elliot Leung.
Oh, really?
Yes, and he is world famous.
Do you have any?
He's even done scores for films.
Oh, really? Do you have any students?
Vince, you're being set up here.
Do you have any students who've gone into? You gotta do it. I can't do it. Do you have any students who've gone into podcasting?
I'm sure I have.
You sure you have? Do you have any? Do you have any of the students? I can't do this. It's so bad.
So
he's one of your former students.
You were my advisor for a year at Wheaton College.
Well, see, I mean that. So tell me when you graduated.
So 2012 is when I graduated.
Okay. Yeah.
But I was a shy student, and I never wanted to impose. And it was just for like a year. My advisor was first Gene Green.
Oh, so you were temporary.
So I was temporary.
Yeah.
And you're like, he's just going to do a podcast.
I remember a lot of my advisors.
But you don't remember. Mike didn't really stick out to you.
Well, it depends on how much he even talked to me.
There we go. It's your fault.
It's
your fault.
I said that at the beginning.
A lot of advisors come in and they just want the number for registration.
Yeah, the problem is you were not invested enough in this relationship. Anyways,
I regret it.
I feel like we can have this reconciliation. Someone who you taught and advised went on to produce Holy Post Media podcast.
Well, there we go. So I have at least one.
At least one. Okay.
You're the one you're the only one I know that's a producer.
So now you can tell all of your future students about.
Yeah, you can start. You can start as an advisor. And you can become. You can make it in the world. That is actually not how we wanted to open the podcast, but I just couldn't resist.
That's good. That's good.
We're going to return to an OG game in the Esau Macaulay podcast. It's called Are You Washed? Now, amongst the young people, washed means you're too old to do stuff. For example, I try to play basketball, I fake left, and I go right, and my knee says you're too old to do that. So that means I'm washed in basketball. So the question of are you washed means, are you competent? Do you still have the skill set to engage in the conversation you're about to have?
And if you're washed, that means
we just can't. We kick you out the podcast.
Okay. It means that you're washed out.
Yeah, you're washed out. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
So since we're going to talk about your documentary, Black Evangelical, I thought I'd ask you a documentary question for both of you.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
And so I went on God's internet and I Googled the top grossing documentaries of all time.
Okay.
And I found that 3 of the top 10 or top 11 were documentaries centering around artists or musicians.
Oh.
And so the question is, can you guess one of the musicians who has one of the top 10 grossing documentaries of all time? Not all 10 are about music, but 3 of the top 10 are about music. So do you have a guess?
I have a guess.
Okay.
Michael Jackson.
Wow, you got it. This is it. There we go. Okay, then. There's 2 more left.
I took the easy one.
I want to say Prince, but there's this 9-hour
no,
thing.
Not the Prince.
That nobody's
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah,
it's supposed to be incredible, but they locked it down.
Miles Davis?
No, you got to go forward in time. Both of these people are alive and still making music.
It's a person, not a group.
It's a person, not a group.
Does Taylor Swift have a documentary yet?
No. Actually, one of them, I forgot, one of them is a group.
Okay.
I'll give you a clue, a boy band.
NSYNC.
No, One Direction.
Oh.
I believe that. Yeah.
And then I'll go to 11. I'll give you another one. I'll tell them to you. Actually, he just put out an album last week. Do you know who that is? Called Swag.
Justin Bieber.
Justin Bieber.
Look at that.
And the last one, I don't think any of you all.
I saw that in the theater.
You saw the
Justin Bieber?
I'm pretty sure I think that's what it was. I don't think it's a
why?
Yeah, can you explain?
Because my kids were Justin Bieber fans.
Oh, that's a good dad.
So what is your review of? I'm sorry, I didn't even look at it. Justin Bieber, Never Say Never. What is your review?
Fame is quite a thing.
Here's a better question. What do you think you remember better, me as a student or the Justin Bieber documentary?
I probably remember the Bieber thing.
All right, that's fair.
Okay.
I mean, again, I mean, if we had had notable conversations about your vocation, I probably would have remembered.
If there's one word used to describe me, notable
This
is not
getting
one
worse.
of them.
So
don't want to do that.
The last one is, I don't think you ought to have gotten this one, was Katy Perry.
Oh, I believe that too.
Part of Me.
That makes
There are
sense.
also 2 animal documentaries. You want to guess which animals got a doc?
Penguins?
Yeah, the March of the Penguins.
Oh, yeah, I remember that one.
And the last one, Chimpanzee. There's actually a lot of
Is the number one a Ken Burns
I was
documentary?
going to say, what about the Ken Burns baseball?
Actually, the number 1 documentary of all time is Fahrenheit 9/11.
Oh.
Number 2 is March of the Penguins.
So,
number 3,
Michael Moore?
Yeah.
yeah. Number 3 is Biebs, and then number 4 is Michael Jackson.
Where is Ken Burns baseball? I thought
Is baseball or jazz or Civil War in there?
None of those.
Ken Burns
None
left.
of those.
Wow.
Sorry,
Okay.
it's not in the top 30.
I'm just glad.
Okay.
I think everyone that tunes into the Esau Macaulay podcast desperately wants to know, what are the top 10 documentaries?
They now know.
And they know.
No, they know.
They
There we
now
go.
know.
So we did have you come on because I actually watched your documentary, Black and Evangelical, and I'm in it for like 5 seconds.
Yes, thank you very much for being willing to be here. We really appreciate it.
But as a question, what made you decide? Because the issue in the current moment is evangelical is a word that is really contested, and it's often has
It's a word. It's a word with public relations problems, shall we say?
and it's often at a preface of preface of white evangelicals. There's a lot of media media emphasis on white evangelicalism.
Mm-hmm.
But why then, in the context of some people running away from the term of evangelical, or at least it's being controversial, why did you decide to make a documentary about Black evangelicalism in this moment?
Well, it goes back to 2008. I was at Fuller Seminary, Pasadena, California, for an event with some other Black evangelicals. During the weekend together, the color commentary of a man named Ron Potter, who's also in the documentary, made clear to me he had in his head the history of Black evangelicals.
Yeah.
And I would even tell people now, go look up Black evangelicals and good luck finding tons of material.
Yeah.
And so for me, initially, the idea was honestly kind of an archival kind of thing. It really became a documentary after we started working with the filmmaker Dan Long, who's also a Fuller alumnus. And so Ed Gilbert and I, my co-creator from Christianity Today, we probably together would have made it something that we wanted to get out there, but it would have been like strictly a talking heads type of thing. But when you work with a filmmaker, it's like, well, how are you actually going to tell this story?
But why should I, the viewer, in 2025, why is a documentary about Black evangelicals important in this moment?
It's important in any moment because the story of the church is important.
Okay.
So that's one reason. A second reason, though, I think it's been, I would say, particularly important is because, if I asked you to define what Black church is, chances are you're not probably going to talk about Black evangelicals. Or, I mean, some of the people that are in the documentary, maybe they'll come up, but they don't get included in the story. So that's one of the reasons. Also, I think one of the biggest reasons is there are a lot of people who are minorities who have some kind of interface with institutional evangelicalism, and they have a range of experiences. But in recent years, shall we say, the tensions in that experience have been magnified, intensified, and there are a lot of ways that I think people may not be aware that their experience is not unique. So it's more like wash, rinse, and repeat, unfortunately.
So you're saying there's a lot of African Americans and other people of color, but African Americans in particular, who are experiencing some tensions about their place within evangelicalism. And you wanted to put that into some kind of historical context.
Yes, and also I want people to know that their experience is not alone.
Yeah. So let me tell you, one of the things that was interesting as I was watching the documentary, and I want to encourage all of you to listen to it, is that I didn't grow up in evangelicalism.
Neither did I.
I grew up in the Black church.
Me too.
I was raised in the Union Hill. I went to Union Hill Primitive Baptist Church.
Primitive Baptist?
Primitive Baptist. There we go. King James Bible.
Why did you react like that?
Well, like,
what's the significance?
Well, I never heard of Primitive Baptist until I lived in Memphis, Tennessee in the late 80s.
Yeah.
And every Primitive Baptist church that I've seen, the buildings are always smaller.
No, so we were like a bad people don't care about Primitive Baptist history, but I'll say 30 seconds. Primitive Baptists are known known for King James Bible only.
Okay.
We a lot of them don't have female clergy, but we actually did have female ministers.
Wow.
Well, my pastor might get in trouble for that, but we did. And we were big, so we were like we were like 1,000 people.
Okay.
So we were pretty.
Wow.
We were pretty
I have
big church.
never
And we had
driven past-
contemporary music. Some of them don't have contemporary music. We have music.
Okay.
And one of the things that we did do in the Primitive Baptist Church is that we had washing of the saints' feet. So you know how some Baptist churches have communion once a month?
Yeah.
We said, well, at the Last Supper, Jesus also washed feet. So we had communion and foot washing every month.
Wow.
So I washed probably more feet than anybody you ever met. So I grew up in that context. And I then went to an evangelical seminary, and I now work at Evangelical College. But I don't actually consider myself a Black evangelical because I feel like that would be erasing the actual church that shaped me. And so I feel like if they invested 22 years in my education and theological formation, where I became the kind of Christian that I am, and then to switch over and say, oh, I'm just a Black evangelical, which has its own separate history, that seems to me would be separating me from my mom, from my parents, from my mom, from my church. So is that an unfair thing? Because I would say
I think it is unfair.
I think I say I'm a child of the Black church is what I say to people.
Yes, it is fair and unfair because the documentary is not just about people that are inhabiting white evangelical institutional spaces.
Yeah.
In fact, the term, like Sung Chon Ra says in the film, lower E evangelical are people who have those characteristics of what evangelical at its best means. In other words, not a political movement, but trust in the Bible, centrality of Jesus, centrality of conversion, centrality of mission. And that's what most Black churches are.
Yeah.
And so they don't know the label, and there's relative engagement with larger white institutional evangelicalism, but there's that little E identification that fits most Black Christians. And then I would also say this, by the way. The purpose of the documentary is not to tell people they need to use the label.
Yeah.
But I will say there are a lot of people, they may go to a place like Wheaton. They went to a National Baptist church or they're Kojic. They come to a place like Wheaton. Yeah. They keep going to a Kojic church when they go back home. But they've had this engagement.
Okay.
It is now part of your formation.
Okay.
And so in some way, you are interacting with this. You are dealing with it. That's why when you look at the title, it says Black plus evangelical, because we're talking about a crossroads experience. That there are ways that people are living with being in this kind of in-between space. And some people, like myself, you work at an evangelical church, we go to a white evangelical church, but there's so many people that they go back to Black Baptist churches or things like that. And so it's not, to use the term Black evangelical, is not to erase those other relationships. It's to recognize that there are a lot of people who have this interface in one way or another. So that's also the reason why the goal for me is not for people to say, I'm an evangelical per se, because it's such a complicated label now. But it is to say, you've had some kind of engagement with this, and it has been formative for you in some ways. And there are probably good ways, and there are probably ways that have created tension for you. So how are you navigating all of that?
So are there common struggles that African Americans have that you say recur as they come into evangelicalism?
Absolutely.
Can you say a little bit about what they were and if you explore those in the documentary?
Absolutely. I think a lot of people, they come into evangelical spaces. There's ways of engaging the Bible that illuminate the Bible for them because the methodology is different than what they may have learned at the churches that they've come from. And they really like that. And some people, they go, oh, I'm going to this place, and they say they're Christians, and I'm really excited about being there. And the presumption is that because of the commitment to the Bible, there's the expectation that it will be an environment of welcome and embrace. But then the fact that it's not merely a biblicist type of place, but it's also a cultural environment, a sociocultural environment, that winds up creating lots of tension for people. In other things I've written, I say there's 4 phases, basically. There's the delight phase. I love all this stuff I'm learning.
There we go. That's nice.
Right? Then there's what I call a dissonance phase, often around an election, where you discover that all these people that you're in a Bible study with, that they voted Republican, and nobody in your family has ever voted Republican. And then you have a distress phase where it ramps up, because when you decide you want to talk about those types of things, people start to either stonewall you, or they're apathetic about it, or at some point they go, why are you getting political? When, of course, when they get political, they're just being biblical. And then people get to a decision phase where they decide, am I going to have some some kind of relationship with this, or am I checking out?
So that was 4D. That's like black church. Like
Yeah.
It was alliteration, which I used to think. I
yeah.
used to think alliteration was cheating,
What
but
is
I
delight?
got over it.
It was delight. Hold on, let me see if I can remember it. Delight,
Yes.
dissonance,
Yes.
distress,
Yes.
decision.
Correct.
He's A+.
There we go. But like two of those, like the middle phase seems to be pretty rough. You didn't add maybe the dissonances in the music. I remember when I grew up in a black church and I went to like a Bible study.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I say I grew up in black church spaces, I mean, I'd never heard a song that was not piano or organ led in my life.
Yeah.
Until like I would hear like on the country music station or the soft rock station. I never forget, like I went into like a Baptist Student Union Bible study, and they were singing like these Michael W. I called them. Forgive me, don't yell at me,
Careful.
people. But I noticed that like a lot of the worship leaders had like 3 names. I thought it was like a rule that if you're a white worship leader, you had to have 3 names. It was like Stephen Curtis Chaplin, Michael W. Smith, and something Talbot or something.
John Michael Talbot.
I was like, why does everybody like? What's the 3? I called them 3-name worship leaders. You know. And then I remember they were like, oh, like this is not age well, but I'm going to ask you what happened. But so. Taking like what happens later with this person's career seriously. It's like, oh, he's black.
Yeah.
Give him some, what's the name of the people who did Jesus Freak? DZ Talk.
Yeah.
And I was like.
They're having some complications.
And I was
right
like,
now. Yeah, a little bit.
yeah. And I was like, the guy who raps is like, that was to me, maybe that's what the dissonance is. I first encountered like a cultural dissonance.
Yes.
Before there was a political dissonance.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so I was like, you know what? Thank you for this. And I've learned to appreciate some of it. But it was like, that was one of the things that made me feel like I wasn't there. One of the interesting things about the documentary, though, is that it does, for the most part, focus on African Americans who come into evangelicalism, and the struggles within evangelicalism that they have to find a place where they feel at home and they feel comfortable. Correct. But there isn't a lot of discussion about the intersection between Black evangelicals, who are they define themselves a lot like that in the documentary, and Black churches. Mm-hmm. And so has there been like much conversation between African Americans who find themselves located in evangelical spaces during the 60s and the 70s and these traditional Black churches that were there at the same time? And how did Black evangelicals interface with like majority Black denominations? Has there been much discussion between those two?
It depends upon the person.
Yeah.
Honestly, I mean, just like the evangelical movement, if we're going to be honest about the movement, we're thinking like best face of evangelicalism here.
Yeah.
It is a ecumenical reality, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's all these different Protestants that will have an alley fight about whether you can take communion at their church.
Yeah.
But they have these same commitments. So there's a lot of difference. There's a lot of variety in the evangelical movement. You have that variety among Black evangelicals as well. Some of them, they've either come up in these sort of like evangelical Bible churches, but they're Black versions of it. Others, they're people who they still have this connection to these other denominational realities. Yeah. So it depends. And even honestly, I mean, it's not, it didn't make it into the interview, but one of the things that Bill Pannell said, he and Tom Skinner would go around and they were preaching all kinds of churches. Yeah. So they weren't just preaching in Black evangelical churches. Yeah. They would preach in, your national Black church or your Kojic church.
I will just say that one of the things that I hear now in contemporary conversation is that Black evangelical is sometimes used almost as a criticism.
A pejorative?
Mm-hmm. Because, especially in more progressive spaces, they're saying these Black evangelicals are the means by which white evangelical politics are being kind of smuggled in or make people comfortable. Yeah. So and I know that
I'm happy to talk about that, how that's a mischaracterization. So just because you see an African American who's at the White House with a certain other group of advisors, shall we say, that doesn't tell you what Black evangelicals are. Yeah. And so, but because you're letting evangelical be defined, arguably these days, by say Paula White, let's go with that. Who, by the way, 20 years ago, nobody's talking about Paula White defining what an evangelical is. But so people presume that they know what it is because you can find 2 or 3, like a Vodi Bakum or somebody who other white people will point to as saying this person is really telling you what the Black experience is about.
Yeah.
If you're going to be honest about it, you've got to actually ask, well, who's the range of these people?
Yeah.
And a lot of times people are not doing that. And then on top of that, and I think this is really important, there is the assumption that if you talk about evangelical commitments, that the problem's the evangelical commitments.
Yeah.
That is not the problem.
Yeah.
The problem is the ethical limitations
Yeah.
or the narrow ethical practice that a lot of white evangelicals have,
Yeah.
where they don't go where their commitment should be taking them.
Yeah.
So the problem isn't whether you think the Bible is true, the centrality of Jesus, talking about justification, atonement, sanctification, all those types of things, which other churches do, by the way.
Yeah.
That's not the problem. The problem is, do you go in terms of your ethical expression, in terms of the practice of Christianity, in terms of the kind of public commitments that you prioritize? Do those things emerge out of those beliefs, or really are they other cultural commitments and they wind up being kind of baptized by, what people choose to emphasize?
One of the things that I think that people will find if they take the time to watch the documentary that they might be surprised by is there is, to me, and I don't want to be too strong on it, maybe I will, like basically a lie about kind of the history of Black evangelicalism and where they've engaged politically. Mm-hmm. Because if you're paying attention to this, and there's the people who show up in Will Purnell, Tom Skinner, and what's the other
John Milbanks?
John Milbanks. And so you see that during the Black Power movement in the 1960s and the 1970s, there are African Americans who are in evangelical spaces, sometimes at great economic and personal cost, who are speaking about issues of race and injustice.
Absolutely.
So it wasn't this idea that it wasn't until 2012 or 2013 that certain African American evangelicals began to talk about race. You had the Tom Skinner, like the famous Tom Skinner Urbana Conference in 1967.
1970.
1970?
1970.
Yeah, 1970.
67 is what set up 1970.
Yeah. In 1970, where he stands up and gives the entire history of slavery and racism in America,
Right.
It presents Jesus as someone whose gospel both transforms people from sin and is concerned with the structures of the world.
Yeah.
And so why do you think that particular history, that's where I think it actually is important in this moment, why do you think that particular history got erased?
I don't think it got erased.
I never heard about it.
Well, the reason, it's because, like good modern people, we look always going forward, thinking about what's trendy, thinking about what's getting the attention, so what has the juice right now.
Yeah.
And that attention leads people to have a tendency to be ahistorical.
Yeah.
And so there are a lot of people, no matter what your race is in this country, where, the thing that gets your attention is what's going forward, not looking back, right? And so I think to your point, it is extremely important that people understand this history because, again, they'll discover that what they've experienced is not unique. They will discover that there's a lot of people that have been talking about this kind of holistic faith that isn't just about, being heavenly minded and no earthly good. People have been talking about that since the 60s, at least.
So you're saying there were Black Christians who had a strong sense of Black consciousness, who were talking about personal sin and structural racism.
Absolutely. In
the 1960s and the 1970s.
Well, and there's a scene there where Walter McCrae talks about within the NBEA. You had all these people. You had some people, and this should surprise us, by the way. Nobody should be surprised. By the way, you can find Black churches where they go, don't you talk about politics in here?
Yeah.
Right, we're talking about just getting folks saved. Right?
Yeah.
But there are some people who say you got to be talking about consciousness. You got to be talking about engaging everything in the culture and on the streets. And other people who would say, as what McCrae puts it, people need to understand that the heart of the matter is the matter of the heart. And you get this trickle down thing if you just get enough people saved. So just like the evangelical movement has diversity within it, Black evangelicals have that diversity. But the point is, to your point, that Black evangelicals definitely have always included people that say we need to care about the entire world.
Hi, it's Esau. If you're looking for another fascinating podcast that touches on religion and spirituality, I have the perfect recommendation for you. The Signal Award-winning show, No Small Endeavor. As a friend and recent guest of the podcast, I can truly say it's worth a listen. Produced by Great Feeling Studios and PRX, No Small Endeavor explores what it means to live a good life. Each episode, host Lee C. Kemp sits down with special guests, like pastor and theologian Tish Harrison Warren, civil rights hero Reverend James Lawson, and one of the world's most influential living theologians, Stanley Hauerwas, to discuss how their faith shaped their journey. If you're looking for a place to start, check out their recent episode with Americana songwriter Drew Holcomb, in which he unpacks how creativity is a way to overcome fear, make something that didn't exist before. It's a beautiful heart-to-heart. Don't miss out. Follow No Small Endeavor on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast.
Zones field got him doing football numbers, only half is grown. He was acting grown.
So most people who listening to this podcast have never heard of Tom Skinner. So for those of you people who have never heard of him, who is he and why is he so important to the history of Black evangelicalism?
He is a singular figure. You know, there's lots of singular figures in the world, but he's definitely one of those. A person who became, a gang leader who gets converted through a radio program. Yes, in New York. And he becomes this person that eventually does this Harlem Crusade.
Modeled after the Billy Graham Crusade.
Exactly.
So you had like the black version.
He basically becomes, a kind of Black Billy Graham figure.
I mean, that was his nickname, right?
But for some people.
Did you know about Tom Skinner?
When white evangelicals began to get excited about him, yes, they were talking about him. So as Pennell, sort of jokingly said, or cynically said, the great Black hope.
Yeah.
And so he was somebody with incredible communicative abilities. And so he's somebody that arguably, until that time when Moody removes his radio program, he is this person that people think about. Oh, he is. He's like, sometimes people talk about the civil rights movement. You would think that Martin Luther King was the only person that did anything, the figurehead. So Skinner was kind of the figurehead of Black Evangelical, right? And when, of course, there were other people doing things. And so he's that person, right? And so, in fact, I remember even in my own formation, so who's that person, when I'm in college in the early 70s? Well, Tony Evans is that person.
Yeah.
Right? So, it's like, they're more than one person.
Yeah.
Right? But the point is that Skinner was that person.
And how does he get into trouble?
Well, he got in trouble because he stopped just talking about people getting converted. And he started talking about the need to have a faith that addressed society. And, as I like to say, the passing civil rights laws in 1964 and 65 did not lead us to have revival by legislation in this country. And so what happened then is, yes, there are things that got better legally, but passing legislation doesn't change people's hearts. And so what happened was he starts talking more about it, and then Moody Radio takes him off the airwaves because they said that he was becoming too political in nature. And we show that letter, a clip of that letter.
I thought that whole section of the documentary was so good because you all played a lot of his message from Urbana 70. And they said as soon as he ended, all of the students jumped up out of their seats. I was ready to jump out of my seat.
Majority white students too.
Yeah, but
it was heavily majority white.
The fascinating line is the students jumped out, but the leadership got nervous.
Yes.
Yeah. And just the fact that he was fired for being too political in the 70s. I mean, you're right what you said before that we think this is a modern thing. Yeah. And it's been around for decades.
One of the things that I was thinking about as I was watching the documentary is evangelicalism tendency to run through Black people.
Yeah.
What I mean by that, there's always, and if you talk about like the 4 phases, maybe I should find like 4 Ds to talk about this phenomenon. But there's often this period of time where this is the person who finally gets it. Yeah. And this is the Black person who finally gets it, who's going to translate evangelicalism to the masses. And then that tends to go until that Black person begins to talk about issues of race and injustice. Yeah. And the criticism often comes
from rinse and repeat.
Yeah. The issue that comes with that, and this is something that like had a tremendous impact on me, is that the criticism is always the same. We don't like their tone. We don't like the way that they say it.
And you have to forget, you can't leave out the fact that I see you're becoming a communist.
Yeah. Yeah, that part too. But then I began to think of this question.
Why are you getting political?
Yeah. Who is the Black person? This is a question. Who actually believes that structural racism is real, who says it in a way that is correct. Yeah. And I began to realize that it was not the way that we said it was the content. And I'll never forget when I was working on my book, Reading My Black, and I'm starting to read Frederick Douglass's like works. And I was like, Frederick just said it the way that he felt it. because he felt that all that he had was the truth. And I realized that and they talked about Frederick's tone. I was like, well, you know what? The tone policing of African-American prophetic voices has been going on for so long. I am no longer confident that it's the manner of speaking. It seems to be what they say itself. Now, so what I'm saying is you can go through this list of African Americans who have a season, everybody likes them, and then people get mad at them.
Like them.
A lot of people like them. Yeah. Then they become a communist. You're like, I've had my communist era. And people got mad at me.
Well, they're labeled a communist.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I think that have marked, if I can talk biographically a little bit, one of the things that helped me to understand about that history is that I think I might have missed the actual darling phase. I think I came in 2016 to 2020.
Yeah, exactly.
We were already mad.
Again, actually, post 2016, I think, is all the more reason we need the documentary, because there are a lot of people that were articulating their dissonance. And the thing is that to me, we have to do more than just name the dissonance. It's important to say, okay, well, now you've done the naming, but you can't be in a kind of desert plain of complaint all the time, because we have to get on with our lives, right? And so I want to encourage people to have, yes, do the naming, but we have to continue on in a life of faithfulness and discerning how to do that. And I think it's really important to help people understand that what people have, like what the scales falling from their eyes.
Yeah.
It's like you're not the first person to have the scales fall from your eyes.
Yes.
When Stan Long says in there that line about, because this is sometimes what happens in the delight phase, people get excited about what they're learning, and they then think that where they came from has nothing.
Yeah.
And he says, maybe we had something different, but it wasn't better.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the biggest things, right?
I wanted to ask you something about a line that you put in the documentary, because maybe, once again, my story is a little bit different in that, like, I never thought evangelical theology in and of itself was magical, because most of those things that I heard, I knew from growing up, right? I knew the Bible was true. I knew that Jesus died for my sins.
It's not magic.
I knew. Like, what I'm saying is, like, what makes me feel comfortable in evangelicalism is the things that I already like. There's a
the actual
synergy.
evangelical commitments.
And so like so everybody knows that if you just like line up the evangelical commitments and you line up historic Black church commitments, they're the same, because the Black church comes out of the revivals of the 1800s, and they just take some of those core theological ideas and they add to it issues of social concern, because they're dealing with issues of slavery and injustice. And so when I come into evangelicalism and people are saying the Bible is the word of God, I was like, I've been told that since I was 5 years old.
That's why for some people you didn't have the disputes in the Black church that you have in white evangelicalism. And here's an interesting thing, by the way, is that Black churches, and I remember Jeremiah Wright, once said that his church, and his church is a UCC church.
Yeah, UCC church.
He said they were more conservative than he was.
Yeah.
And because it's the Greek University of Chicago, et cetera. My point being that
his congregation was more conservative.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You get a lot of Black clergy that get formed in progressive white spaces.
Yeah.
Well, they can't bring back to their churches and like stay in the job anyway if they're going to just be telling people to think differently about the Bible.
But
go ahead.
The line that I wanted to get to you, sorry,
go ahead. That's fine.
You said of Vincent Bacote. You said,
well, I said a lot of things.
Yeah, I know. You said in this conversation around the Black church and evangelicalism that when I first came into evangelicalism, I kind of looked down on. So that's part of your past.
That's the whole point I'm making. Is that
when did you have that reckoning of saying, wow, I think I was too negative towards like my Black church? Was that early on?
I think that there were different phases of it, honestly, because part of it was there was preaching that had this more intellectual content, if you will, or different kind of intellectual content.
Yeah, probably a different kind would probably be better.
And part of it was also, I think, learning that, for example, if you have a lot of emotion in your expression, emotion isn't dissonant with intellectual depth.
Yeah.
Right. And so for me, I would say probably in the 90s, honestly. Yeah. So some of it happened while I was a student at Trinity.
Yeah.
But for example, for me, the Black preaching tradition was saved, if you will, for me, Because the church that I went to when I was getting my doctorate degree, I was like, wait, oh, you mean that there are people who do expository preaching at Black churches, but the style is this traditional style? I didn't know that existed.
Yeah.
And so you get exposed to things in a certain form, and you can think that the form and the content are always together, when really that's not necessarily the case at all. And also, actually, if you survey this broad thing called Black preaching, you have some people, they would never hoop if you put a gun to their head.
Yeah.
Then there are other people, they're tuning every Sunday, right?
Yeah.
But the point is that doesn't tell you anything about what they are saying.
Yeah.
And so that was one of the things that I had to learn.
One of the things that I learned, and so it's funny because I come into this and maybe I just emotionally responded differently to the criticism of Black churches. Like I can't, not from you, like when I went to these schools and they're like actively doing things that I think are against the Bible. I was like, who do you think you are to criticize my tradition? Yeah. And what was happening, they were choosing their 4 or 5 best preachers and they were judging them against a Black stereotype. Yeah. And I said, if you actually survey, like there's a lot of bad preaching everywhere. Bad preaching knows no tradition. Yeah. And so I felt, like one of the things that you said, the idea that you can't be emotional. I'll never forget when I was at, I was working on my PhD and I was researching Galatians and I was reading a certain British scholar who said, Paul is a little bit angry in this letter and we know this is off-putting to us. I was like, not off-putting to me. It's okay to feel things. And so the idea that you can preach and feel to me is great. Now I want to ask you just a couple of questions. What happens to Tom Skinner? Because like if he goes through the darling phase, what happens after the evangelicals get annoyed with it?
Well, it's mostly white evangelicals that get annoyed with him, but there are, there's that line there. He said, and part of the sad thing was that other Black people started believing that if the white people said that there was something wrong with Skinner, that he was untrustworthy. Yeah, and so he winds up being kind of marginalized, and he does wind up. He eventually goes through a divorce. He gets remarried. Yeah, but he's back. That scene, that message from Atlanta '88. Yeah, I mean, by that time, Skinner's still a prominent figure. Yeah. So the point is that he falls out of favor of being a darling of white evangelicalism. Yeah. Right. And then there's kind of, I don't know if you would necessarily call it like a wilderness, but you have this period in the later '70s where he's, I want to say on the margins, but he's not the prominent figure.
One of the other things you talked about in the doc that I wanted to raise with you that I thought was really interesting, and I remember.
And by the way, Skinner is 52 when he dies. Wow. In the 90s. Unbelievable. Yeah. Right? Cancer. Just incredible.
One of the things you talked about was the evangelicals and racial reconciliation movement in the 1990s. Yes. Now, I had not arrived in evangelicalism. I've not been proximate to them during the Promise Keepers movement. This was in like the mid-90s?
Yes, that's right.
So at this time...
Yes, when I was in grad school.
Sorry.
It's all right. I've come to terms with being. I'm kind of like in some ways like my own generation of things, right?
So it's like 96. I'm in high school at this point.
I'm just a young boy watching cartoons.
Maybe you were in his class. Not him forgetting about you.
I was actually at Promise Keepers right next to
Promise
you.
Keepers. So there's this. So
I had roommates that went to Promise Keepers in 1994.
But the people who don't know about Promise Keepers, it was kind of initially billed as this like men's and like be Christian men movement
and be responsible, be better husbands, fathers,
which is good. You should be a decent husband. Yeah. But then they get into we're going to do racial reconciliation
because Bill McCartney spends a lot of capital of various kinds. Making racial reconciliation a central plank of Promise Keepers.
And what happens to Promise Keepers? So by the time I get to an evangelical school in 2002, people say it kind of killed Promise Keepers.
Out. Yeah, I mean it did. I remember in. No, I know we're not talking. We're not doing the academic thing. Yeah, okay. But in the book Divided by Faith by Michael Emerson and Christian Smith, they note that what happened when McCartney would go around raising money after he started making racial reconciliation a central plank. All of us, you could, it's like he'd go into a place and you could see like the temperature in the room go down when he brought that up. And so that wound up creating, I think, a significant problem for them to have the level of fervor that they had. And also, I would say, even when it came to the racial reconciliation part, because this is the part that I think is so here's the good thing about it, and then I'll say what the problem was. The good thing about it was that he actually was willing to name it. When I went to Trinity in the early 1990s, I remember thinking, how can you even get evangelicals to take racism seriously?
Yeah.
In other words, can you prove that that racism is a biblical thing to care about? Now, I'm like, yes, it's a species of antagonizing neighbor love. It's not hard to talk about. But back then, I thought you got to have like a Bible verse that shows you that says racism is wrong, right? And so you started to have this attention to racial reconciliation, but it wound up being, and especially if you think about it in terms of Promise Keeper, the good thing about it, I mean, McCartney was all in.
Yeah.
But I think McCartney wanted it to be something that happened. It's like, okay, we put all these people together in this room. We got these thousands of men. We tell them that we want to slay this dragon.
Stop being racist.
Yeah,
and then go back home.
Exactly. Well, I mean, he wanted the revivalist effect. So he wanted there to be this transformation that would occur because people were in the room together.
Yeah.
When really you need a whole lot more formation to deal with this. Because then people thought that, okay, what's the idea then? If we're willing to, go to church together or willing to have coffee together, then we've done what we've needed to do. When it's like, no, actually, if you're going to deal with this, you need to be ready. It's like, think about a horror movie you don't want to see.
Yeah.
You've got to go to that horror movie.
Yeah.
If you're going to really contend with the question.
It was one of them.
And people didn't want to do that.
So basically, it was like this naive, good intention, but naive idea that you can end racism by having a relationship. Like maybe even going to a baseball game.
By having, I would say I call it a sentiment without a strategy is what happens. In other words, if you're hoping that people are going to just have I'm not a Wesleyan in terms of my theology, but have a kind of entire sanctification experience around racial reconciliation. In other words, if it happens to me in the moment, if I'm in the room and I hear this and I'm impacted and I feel something emotionally, that somehow it changes everything. But the problem is that it stayed in the stadium.
I've got a question though, because the critique now of Promise Keepers is that it only focused on individual racism and not systemic. But if even back then only focusing on individual racism,
even that was amazing.
He still lost all of his funding. It still fizzled out.
Yes.
Was it just a no-win situation no matter what he did? They did?
I'll use a contemporary example to say, I don't want to say no-win, but what I'll say is this. So when the George Floyd thing happened in 2020 and people said we were having a racial reckoning, I said, talk to me in 5 years. And I didn't know that, wow, wouldn't we be seeing something in 5 years? Yeah. But the reason why is because it's not just something that you can say and then it just works out. But, I should care about this. Well, no, to care about this means you have to be willing to be in something like being in a marriage, right? Because when you get married to somebody, you can have the greatest marriage, but you will discover you're married to somebody who's like they're from another country, and you're like from another country to them. And for you to live that life together, you got a lot of work to do, a lot of patience, a lot of understanding, learning about a lot of misunderstanding, learning how to listen better, learning how to be with that person and recognize all the answers you don't have, all that type of stuff. And that's not the way that it gets advertised. It's like, okay, it's like a revival experience. We have a kind of conversion around this. Yeah. And now that we have a kind of conversion around this, it kind of takes care of everything else. Yeah. Well, when you hardwire into the modern world, for 3 or 4 centuries, racism being just kind of the way of the world, like by law.
Yeah.
Legislation doesn't give you a revival.
Yeah.
It doesn't change the hearts. And there are a lot of people, when it comes to dealing with it, I mean, I think there are people who are well-intended, but they don't know what to do with all this stuff. That really, I think, becomes a big problem. And here's one of the biggest things I think the Promise Keepers thing is essentially like all the people were in the stadium together, and for the most part, they never got together after they went out of the stadium.
So I feel like
and stayed together.
Let's give us 30 seconds of what happens to McCartney after that? Like what happens to him personally? We know?
I mean, he's still doing things. The only kind of cultural disapproval he has is because he's a conservative evangelical.
Yeah.
And then eventually he's still around, but he also wanted Promise Keepers. His dream was for Promise Keepers to actually really have prominence of African American leadership and stuff, and that it just didn't cash out very well.
So one of the things that I learned from maybe intuiting a lot of this history, because I didn't know about all of this stuff, but I had just seen all of the African Americans who had this moment of like Christian celebrity.
Yeah.
They said something about race. There was a disapproval. And then the idea that relational stuff was going to fix it.
Yeah.
And
I mean, by the way, Skinner, part of the, that whole section is like the kind of the hinge of the movie.
Yeah.
His experience is like the paradigm, the example of, it's like a lot of people have been there. They've been the one.
They've been the one. Yeah.
And then they got quote unquote political, and then they're marginalized.
So one of the things that maybe this is either good or bad, I just never thought it was my job to convince people that racism was real. And so I've tried to say, you know what, I'm not going to, education is not necessarily my goal. My goal is to help people who understand that these realities exist, how to live as Christians. Like you don't have to convince a fish about the existence of water. They swim in it. And so I'm trying to speak to other fish who are swimming in the water, healthy in a way that is viable for them. Are there any particular things? So the documentary ends kind of with an open-ended, like what's going to be the future? Do you have any?
But not a negative future.
Not a negative future. So what do you think is the most hopeful future for Black evangelicalism?
People recognizing that your disappointments with something do not just get rid of your agency. You still have a life. You have a vocation. You can still grow in your life with God, grow in the ministry that God has for you. Ephesians 2:10 isn't vetoed for you because you've had dissonance in the evangelical movement. And so I want people to, one, recognize that there are people who are with them. You are not alone. I want people to understand that you still have agency. Some people, as Ruth Bentley says, they're like us. They can work at a place like Wheaton College. I'm not telling people they need to even be part of evangelical like institutions in the film. But I do want people to pursue lives of faithfulness, and people can still do that. Disappointments in the church are everywhere. So if you think you're going to migrate to some other place and you're not going to get disappointed, just wait. The crazies are there too. The disappointments may be same or different. But I think it's important for people to understand that there is a life of faithfulness to them, and they have an agency for putting into, history their contributions. In other words, God gives you a life. He gives you gifts. He gives you opportunities. Can you use those things to serve him in a way in times and places? And it may be in a traditional Black church. It may be in foreign mission somewhere. It may be in a white evangelical institution or some other place. But you have an opportunity to do something. And so I want people to understand that they still have that possibility.
The way that I've seen it is there have been basically different categories. There are like Black evangelicals who lead majority Black churches that are culturally Black, but that are kind of not organically related to historical Black church.
Right.
Then there's Black-led multi-ethnic churches. I think we're trying to accomplish.
Some of those, yes.
Some of those things.
Yeah.
So we're trying to accomplish that at All Saints. And then there's African Americans and white-led churches.
Yes.
Do you feel like one of those...
And African Americans in obviously traditional Black churches.
So I'm within the evangelical world.
Yeah.
So
sure.
Do you think that... Which one of those do you think is the future for Black evangelical? You think it'll be all three of those?
All the above. All the above, because there's a diversity of gifts in the body. Some people, they are only going to be frustrated if they're in a predominantly white space.
Yeah.
Someone like me, I'm a cultural shapeshifter. Not because I don't lack integrity. It's just who I am. I'm able to code switch and do all that stuff, and it's not a violation of integrity for me. It's just the person that I am.
Yeah.
Everybody's not that person. So the point isn't telling people you have to be in this space, because sometimes what happens is, hey, if you're committed to us, you must do X, Y, and Z. For the Christian, you should never say that if you believe in a diversity of gifts in the body. There's all kinds of different vocations for people. And so I think the question people be asking is, Ephesians 2:10, what are the works God has for you? They're all over the place. They're in all kinds of settings. There's not one place.
So now where can they find this documentary if they want to watch it? Let people know.
BlackEvangelicals.com. And Black Evangelicals is not two separate words. That'll take you somewhere else. So Black Evangelicals together.
I kind of want to know where it takes you.
I'm curious now. No, I mean, it's not like, oh, wow, what a surprise. Yeah. No, that's not what I mean.
Yeah.
But it's the word Black Evangelicals is all one word, .com.
Okay, Black
you there.
And you can watch it for free?
Absolutely.
And you could even have a screening.
You can have a screening, and you can invite
church.
me to come, or me and Ed Gilbreth to come and talk to you afterwards, and we can talk about it. Just there's a link for that, and we and I'm very thankful, by the way. I just want to say this. There's not been a single criticism of the documentary.
Oh,
I have not received any.
Oh, we will.
Don't worry. Don't worry.
Audience,
don't worry.
Do your thing, audience.
Don't worry.
Do your thing, haters.
I'm sure it's still early in the game. Somebody is not going to like it. But here's what I want to say to people. Anybody who thinks that because we're talking about Black and Evangelical, oh, you're bringing this up. Well, I say to them, did you watch the film?
Okay, then. There we go.
Watch the film, and then, you'll see. The point about the film is not a hit piece. The point is, it's an important story to tell. And if you care about the history of the church, it's a church story. It is not merely a special interest story.
Okay. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast, Vince.
Thank
you for all that you contributed today, Mike.
I was just going to say, what do you think is the future for a podcast hosted by a Black man with a white producer?
I just think it shows that a Wheaton college education can lead to all kinds of amazing things.
Amazing.
All right. Thanks so much. The Esau Macaulay podcast is a production of Holy Post Media, produced by Mike Stay Low, Stray Low. If you know, now you know. Edited by Seth Gorvette, like a Corvette. Music by Rob Knorr. Make sure to follow the show wherever you get your podcast and leave a review so more people can find it. See you next time. I'm out.